Back in 2010, before the days of Undertale and Sans, a different character played Megalovania as her national anthem. A controversial woman from a different dimension, a blue troll with a penchant for the number 8, a figure who went down in history as the woman who did nothing wrong.
Vriska did nothing wrong. So there is the message that you paid money for. Maybe it's your ringtone now?
The days of Vriskors have passed, though, and in the wake of Homestuck content gravitating away from the main cast, Vriska has been overlooked as of late. With some distance between the end of Homestuck and now, what better time is there to discuss everyone's favorite big blue bitch? It's time to unravel, for the unwashed masses, Vriska Serket. Part 1. Life Pre-Homestuck. A Lesson in Alien Societal Stratum. Before we can discuss Vriska properly, we need to get a contextual understanding of life on her home planet of Alternia. This upbringing will come up later, so I'll run through the basics to the best of my understanding. Trolls on Alternia have a completely different life cycle than humans. For starters, instead of a mother and father, trolls are born of the mother grub, an enormous grub who, using the combined genetic material of dozens or possibly hundreds of trolls at once, lays eggs which hatch into the insectoid troll babies, known as wigglers. Upon a certain degree of maturity, the wigglers begin an exodus of the brood caverns and are subsequently selected by one of a wide variety of animals collectively known as lussi. The lussus then cares for the troll as a parent would, usually in some sort of symbiotic relationship. Some trolls seem to protect their lussus, some others are protected by them, but most seem to view their lussus as a very close pet and parent alike. A troll whose lussus dies is culled, which is a practice that occurs due to various infractions against troll law. A troll can also be culled for being homeless, causing unrest, or failing to produce enough genetic material. They are generally culled by beings known as drones, who work as an automated police force on Alternia. Trolls are also part of a social structure known as the hemospectrum. Each troll has a specific blood color, ranging from lowest to highest, as follows: burgundy, bronze, gold, lime, olive, jade, teal, cerulean, indigo, purple, violet, and fuchsia. There are also mutant trolls who possess candy red blood, but these individuals rarely reach maturity on Alternia. Limebloods are also non-existent any longer due to their powerful abilities causing a power struggle before the events of the comic. The hemospectrum could be its own video, so I'll give you the Cliff's Notes. The higher you go on the spectrum, the more powerful and important you become, as well as the rarity of your caste. Red bloods are very common, very weak, and only survive for a decade or two, whereas there are only ever 2 fuchsia bloods at one time, and they act as Alternia's ruling caste. Vriska falls relatively in the middle, being considered a high blood, but on the fringes of the distinction. Despite being referred to as a spectrum, each troll seems to neatly fall into each specific caste, with no color variation inside each different caste. Vriska, being of cerulean blood, benefits from the hemospectrum in that she is more important than many low bloods. She doesn't often invoke her place on the hemospectrum, as most cerulean bloods seem to prefer to keep their heads down in the affairs of hemoglobin. She is unique in her caste, however, in that she possesses a rare power. Some castes have innate powers, like the psychic abilities of the gold blood, but blue bloods have no specific powers to speak of. Vriska, however, has 2 noteworthy abilities: her vision 8-fold, as well as her ability to mind control the weak-minded. More on those later. During her time as a Wiggler, Vriska was selected by a different sort of lussus than most. Instead of a custodian or protector, Vriska was taken in by a being known only as Spider Mom. At Spider Mom's maturity, she was the size of a house and 8 trolls. The task of feeding fell, of course, to Vriska. Unlike her friends who enjoyed the lussus's affection, Vriska's relationship was strained. It's generally understood that if Vriska didn't feed Spider-Mom, the wayward Lussus would instead feast on Vriska. This made her unique in troll society, for while culling and other such brutality was very commonplace, Vriska's entire life was a kill or be killed proposition. Vriska began to participate in a game called Flarp, a certain type of live-action roleplay with more realistic consequences, to get victims to feed her mother. She threw herself into the game, as it was both a way to connect to other players and a way to feed Spider-Mom. During this time, she made friends with fellow Flarper Terezi Pyrope. During her exploits, she also found the journal of her ancestor, a troll known as Marquise Spinneret Mindfang. Ancestry works quite differently on Alternia. Vriska was not Mindfang's direct descendant, but she was a genetic copy of her ancestor, who had lived years and years ago. Vriska began to pattern her life after Mindfang, often reworking her Flarp character to match her ancestor. She also made use of the Fluorite Octet, a set of deadly dice Mindfang used. The diary Mindfang left her became Vriska's own personal Bible. Part 2. Pre-Sburb Life. Perpetuating Vengeance. There are two primary forces that shape Vriska's adolescent life. 1. Her Lussus, Spider-Mom. 2. Mindfang's journals. These two formative elements primarily manifested in her Flarp exploits. Flarp becomes both a means of escapism and survival at the same time. She used to Flarp with a boy named Aridin, but she quickly got bored of him and his unreciprocated crush. She also Flarped with her teammate Terezi, forming Team Scourge, the duo becoming known as the Scourge Sisters. She and Terezi did battle with Team Charge, comprised of Aranea and Tavros, the latter of whom Vriska would begin a somewhat hard-to-describe relationship with. She believes Tavros is weak and needs help becoming stronger. Her efforts to this end are mostly both misguided and malicious. These efforts come to a head when Vriska mind controls Tavros into leaping off a cliff. This permanently cripples him, which enrages Tavros' teammate, Aranea. During this time, Vriska also begins to correspond with Doc Scratch, who has a cue ball for a head and lives on the moon. Don't ask. He's a near-omnipotent being who guards Alternia, a term I use loosely. A whole video could be devoted to him, but frankly, I won't bother. He and Vriska play chess together, which Vriska cheats at using her magic cue ball. It's like a magic 8-ball, don't worry about it. Vriska's earlier misstep in causing Tavros to jump from a cliff sparks one of the first major conflicts in Vriska's life to date, what I like to call the Vriska vengeance cycle. Aranea becomes enraged at Vriska's acts against Tavros, and to get even with her, she sends ghosts, which Aranea can speak to, don't worry about it, to haunt Vriska, specifically the ghosts of trolls Vriska had fed to Spider-Mom. This is deeply distressing to Vriska, nearly bringing her to tears. The fact that she becomes so upset after seeing her victim speaks to her complex feelings regarding Spider-Mom. While she doesn't often bemoan having to feed her Lussus, she does get incredibly nettled when all of her kills are sent to harass her. She gets so upset with Aranea for this, in fact, that after communicating with Doc Scratch for advice, she makes Aranea pay. Vriska uses her mind control once again, this time controlling Aranea's friend/lover, Solix, who is a Goldblood with incredible psychic abilities, to kill her. Terezi gets wind of Vriska's shenanigans and is none too pleased with her fellow Scourge sister. Terezi confronts Vriska about her misdeeds, but upon seeing no remorse from her angry friend, she perpetuates the cycle of revenge. Terezi tips off Doc Scratch that Vriska had been cheating at chess with him using the cue ball. Doc Scratch is angry and blows the cue ball to smithereens while Vriska happened to be holding it. The result did not kill Vriska, but it did cause her to lose her vision eightfold, as well as her entire right arm. Vriska patches herself up with the help of her next-door neighbor, a robotically inclined indigo-blooded troll named Equius. Before this, however, as the cycle of revenge goes, Vriska needed to give Terezi some payback as well. In one of the most complicated instances of mind control to date, Vriska first mind controls Tavros, and, using his power to commune with Lussi, she uses his mind control to control Terezi's Lussus, a dragon, into convincing Terezi to walk outdoors and stare directly into the sun. which of course blinds Terezi. With all of her foes incapacitated, the cycle of revenge is temporarily bookmarked. It's vital to note that Terezi showed Vriska a lot of mercy, but Vriska showed none back to her, nor anyone else she wronged in this time. Vriska, during her pre-Sburb days, also constantly refers to her bad luck, which becomes a theme with her. More on that later. Much of her luck seems self-imposed, such as her penchant for leaving broken Magic 8 balls and D4s around her hive for herself to step on. Her friend/unrequited crush, Kanaya Mariam, and Doc Scratch tell her how her rotten luck seems to be the result of her willingness to do harm unto others. She does show a modicum of remorse, however, as she commissions her neighbor to make a soul bot for Aradia's spirit to eventually inhabit. Part 3. Scrub. Dead moms and deader selves. Vriska's life and her friends' lives are upheaved when they all participate in a game that ends their world. The intricacies of Scrub or Sburb, like many other topics in this video, are better left for later, but for now understand this simplified version. Scrub is a game that, when played, ends the player's universes. The goal of the game, loosely speaking, is to create a new universe by completing various incredibly difficult and arbitrary tasks in the style of an adventure game. During a session, players can amass and develop godlike powers that Vriska is quick to work on mastering. Before entering the game, Vriska and Equius's hives, homes, are destroyed in an explosion, which causes Spider-Mom mortal wounds. This marks a symbolic turning point in Vriska's life, as she makes the choice to mercy kill Spider-Mom. Her complex maternal feelings come to a head, as she has to use her favorite weapon, the Florid Octet, to do the deed. She ponders if a successful roll would be good or bad luck. During her time inside the game, Vriska and Tavros spend a lot of time together. Some of their time seems amicable, but Vriska is both obsessed with making Tavros stronger, a misguided task at best, and her burgeoning crush on him. One of the goals in Scrub is to build one's home taller so they can access portals in the sky. Vriska helps Tavros by building his house tall enough, but she fails to build any ramps in the structure, adding insult to injury, literally, as Vriska was the one who left Tavros wheelchair-bound and demands that he apologize for being a cripple. In retribution, Kanaya, another young troll who happens to have something of a crush on the blue blood, chides Vriska for not building some ramps for the poor boy. Kanaya also begins mothering Vriska, a common trait among her blood caste, the Jade Bloods. She picks up Vriska's house for her, scolding her for various wrongdoings. While Kanaya's affections seem quite romantic, Vriska remains staunchly platonic, but she doesn't dissuade Kanaya from her efforts outside of chiding Kanaya for being meddlesome, referring to her as Fussy Fangs. Vriska eventually allows both Tavros and Kanaya's affections to come to a head. First, Kanaya crafts Vriska a fairy dress, complete with blue wings, which Vriska then wears when she kisses Tavros out of the blue. Tavros is overwhelmed by the kiss, crumpling to the ground, unable to speak and stand. Kanaya, who bears witness to it, becomes angry that her feelings have been played with. Vriska later expressed that she had no idea why Kanaya stopped talking to her. Eventually, Vriska builds Tavros a rocket-powered wheelchair, and the two meet in person so they can work on the game together. Vriska, of all 12 trolls embroiled in their scrub session, seems to have the easiest time of it outside of Aradia, who has been put in a robotic body by Equius. Aradia, now alive and ready to continue the cycle of vengeance from before the game, appears before Vriska and proceeds to beat her within an inch of her life. She likely would have finished the deed, but upon seeing Tavros associating with Vriska, Aradia simply disappears. What follows is one of the most upsetting exchanges in all of Homestuck. There's a certain level players can achieve during scrub sessions. If a player is fully leveled up and they pass away on a certain artifact known as a quest bed, they achieve a status known as God Tier, the intricacies of which, as usual, must be saved for later. Vriska, being on the brink of death, begs Tavros to bring her to her quest bed. She will of course turn into her ultimate form, which is the Thief of Light, whose powers generally include stealing luck from other people. Tavros brings Vriska to her quest bed, and upon depositing her, she begins to mind control him. She's unconscious, so she can only communicate by mind controlling him from her dream, using Tavros to write messages for himself using her blood. Using these messages, she pleads and begs Tavros to kill her, refusing to force him to do so with mind control. She's afraid of bleeding out, begging him to end her life. Instead, he leaves in tears, and slowly Vriska dies, ascending to God tier. Taking the rejection personally, Vriska later insists to the desperately confused Tavros that she is over him in an online memo. Tavros doesn't know what to say, and the duo part ways. The game wraps up, Vriska delivers the final blow to the troll's final enemy, the Black King. The game is won. However, the gang can't claim their prize, as a mysterious threat named Bec Noir suddenly appears, utterly destroying them. Aranea quickly spirits them away to safety in a secluded meteor, which happens to be outfitted with a laboratory complex where they can all hide from Bec Noir. Part 4. Post-Scrub, a meteoric mess. After living in the meteor safely for some time, the source of Bec Noir is discovered. Across the vast expanse of the multiverse, also known as Paradox Space, another species is playing a different session of the same game. In this game, Bec Noir was created and sent to the troll session before they could claim their reward. According to de facto leader Carcat, the course could not be more clear. They ought to do what they do best in a matter that borders on the eponymous. Vriska chooses John Egbert as her subject for trolling. John is an ideal candidate, as her underhanded way of doing things is lost upon the incredibly earnest boy. Initially, she only assists him because at an earlier point, John was being helped by Terezi. Wishing to one-up her scourge sister, she opts to help him along on his quest, and the two of them bond significantly. Over the course of an unspecified amount of time, Vriska begins to thoroughly meddle in the human session. She tries to mind control John, but she can't mind control humans, only able to make them fall asleep or wake up. She then tries to practice her mind control on John's friend Jade throughout Jade's life, causing Jade to believe she has narcolepsy. She makes it her business to help John realize his potential, but at the same time along the way, she facilitates a few not-so-savory things in the human session. At this point, Vriska seems to fancy herself something of a hero. She dealt the final blow to the Black King, so she thinks she ought to be the one to face down and kill Bec Noir. So, in a move that can only be described as Vegeta-like, she facilitates his creation in order to make sure that she becomes the hero she thinks she is. The manner in which she does this is unnecessarily convoluted and involves several journals with genetic code. Just don't worry about it, trust me. Tavros, who has been given a new functional set of legs by Kanaya and Equius, discovers the scope of what Vriska has been doing. He finds out she created Bec Noir and confronts her. Vriska is hiding out away from Tavros in a shrine to Nicolas Cage. Her love for Nicolas Cage is an acquired taste from John, for some reason. At this point, Vriska is thoroughly fed up with Tavros and pushes him off another cliff, this time with a lance embedded in his chest. It's important to note that Vriska allowed Tavros to be the one to initiate combat. She likely assumed he would wimp out as usual. The fact that he does not clearly leaves Vriska quite shaken. Vriska's time with John seems to have blurred her sense of morality and heroism. Her altercation with Tavros afterwards, she confesses to John that she feels remorse for many of the things she'd done, including kill Tavros. Still, she makes two resolutions. 1. She would kill Bec Noir like she'd planned, and 2. She would go on a date with John. John is surprisingly understanding. Before Vriska can depart the meteor to fight Bec Noir, however, she is caught in a fight between several trolls. Gamzee, a literal clown, has gone insane and killed 2 trolls. Terezi finds the dead body of Tavros and surmises that Vriska killed him due to some telltale fairy dust near the crime scene. She then finds the 2 bodies that Gamzee killed and attributes them to Vriska as well. Meanwhile, Aranea has an unrelated fight with another 2 trolls. The whole affair comes to a head when, taking matters into her own hands, a presumably dead Kanaya, complete with sucking gut wound and new vampire powers, chainsaws Aranea in half and punches Vriska right the fuck in the face. Vriska is incredibly enamored by this, and, far too late, Kanaya's one-sided crush is requited. Part 5. Death. Timeline bullshit. Alright, folks. Everything up to this moment has been a walk in the fucking park. Let me clue you in to something Homestuck is famous for. Timeline shenanigans. From this point, the moment that Vriska decides to leave and fight Bec Noir, 3 different timelines diverge. I'm going to discuss them as organically as I can, so bear with me. Timeline number 1. About to leave the meteor to fight Bec Noir, Terezi confronts Vriska. Terezi thinks that fighting Bec Noir is a shitty idea, but Vriska doesn't care. Terezi flips a coin, and when Vriska wins using her luck powers, she goes to fight him. Unfortunately for Vriska, this goes terribly for her. Despite Terezi's reluctance, Vriska goes to fight Jack. Unfortunately, when she arrives, instead of fighting him, he completely ignores her, following her scent back to the meteor. When he returns, it is with Terezi and Karkat's bodies. Enraged, Vriska begins to fight in earnest. Vriska rolls for Fluoride Octet and gets the best possible roll, which is 8 8s. Of course, 8 to the power of 8. The outcome is never decided in this particular bout, but according to Doc Scratch, he wouldn't bet against her. Timeline number 1 occurs entirely in Terezi's mind. She has the power to predict the future based on the actions of others. Once she sees the future, she cannot allow it to pass and cannot allow Vriska to leave. Which brings us to timeline number 2. Once Terezi observes timeline 1, she makes a decision. Instead of letting Bec kill them, she kills Vriska, stabbing her in the chest. Vriska's conditional immortality is such that when she is killed in a just manner, she stays dead. In timeline number 2, Vriska goes to the afterlife, a place known as the Dream Bubbles, in which ghosts commingle for eternity. All of the ghosts from the players of the Humans and Trolls sessions reside in the Dream Bubbles, including many versions of the players from alternate timeline. Vriska meets one such dead alternate self, a version of John who was killed by following Terezi's advice early on in his session of the game. This alternate timeline, John and Vriska date for an unspecified amount of time, but break up, seemingly on good terms. Unfortunately, later, doomed John dies, presumably at the hands of a certain cherub. Part 5.1, Timeline number 2, Sad Bitch Hours. Timeline 2 Vriska, known henceforth as Dead Vriska or Ghost Vriska, traverses the Dream Bubbles. Her life is somewhat marred by a lack of purpose. The heroism she thought was so important was robbed from her by her own hubris. She begins to crave more plot relevancy, wishing to be important once again. By this point, the focus of the story shifts somewhat. Bec Noir is no longer the big bad. A different evil by the name of Lord English has emerged, a demon said to bring about the end of the universe. More importantly, Lord English is destroying Dream Bubbles. In her attempts to claw her way back into plot relevance, Vriska, Dead Vriska, begins to search for a certain ring, a ring that will bring her back to life. Oddly enough, she is presented this very ring by the author of Homestuck, Andrew Hussie, in a token of his love, when he asks her to marry him, and then she refuses. Alright. During this fascinating altercation, Vriska is momentarily brought back to the land of the living. In Spurb, there is an artifact called a Kernel Sprite that can bring dead things back to life. Gamzee, the clown from earlier, has been carrying around dead bodies in a refrigerator. He tosses Tavros and Vriska's bodies into one of these Kernel Sprites, creating a being known as Tavros Sprite. Due to the extremely unstable nature of a fusion between Tavros and Vriska, the sprite quickly Tavros-splodes. After this, Tavros and Vriska find themselves together in the afterlife. A little while later, John, the John who didn't die, appears. When people sleep, they appear in the Dream Bubbles as well. Did I mention that? John grabs the ring Andrew Hussie had, which Vriska does not realize is the Ring of Life. And after fidgeting around with Tavros over it, Vriska explains her latest plan to him. There's a new big bad in town, Lord English, and Vriska is trying to find a treasure that will help defeat him. Unfortunately, that involves navigating an expansive void called the Furthest Ring with no landmarks. Fortunately, Lord English is going around destroying things, and ironically in so doing, creating the very landmarks that Vriska needs to get around. She is trying to strategically lead him around so she and Tavros can map out new places to explore and search. Two new trolls, Meenah and Aranea, who are both versions of Vriska and her friend Feferi from an alternate reality, show up during this altercation. Meenah boasts that she has accumulated an army. Vriska, not knowing who the fuck this is, refuses to join them, and the duo summon their friends to fight. After a brief and confusing kerfuffle, the two agree to smash their plans together and use Meenah's massive army to go on Vriska's treasure hunt. Later, John runs into Vriska again. Vriska has acquired a ship and is using it to sail around the dream bubbles. Most of the crew is mind-controlled by Aranea. Aranea is Vriska's alternate self, sort of, from an alternate timeline, sort of, and the two don't get along too well, despite being partners. Meenah and Vriska, however, get along swimmingly. The next time a sleeping John meets Vriska, she's further along. Most of the crew seems to have dissipated, though, leaving her and Meenah and Aranea behind. Vriska desperately wants to find the ring as well. John tells Vriska that he has the ring, but in a turn of events, he refuses to give it to her. This crushes Vriska, because John meant a lot to her, as did becoming unkilled. Still, she manages to find what she was looking for. A house-shaped, glowing treasure that will give someone crazy powers to defeat Lord English. She entrusts this power to John, who, upon touching the house, sticks his entire hand through continuity and disappears in a zap of retconningly white light. This will come up again in timeline number 3, but for now, don't worry about it. Aranea manages to get her hands on the ring, unfortunately, and despite her earnest intentions, massively fucks up and causes a game-over style event to transpire back in the real world. Meenah and Vriska are now alone. The crew has disbanded because Aranea had been the one pulling most of the weight via mind control, and disillusioned, Meenah and Vriska begin a relationship. Vriska isn't used to not caring about things and devotes herself to a largely nihilistic Meenah. Initially, Meenah is incredibly loving, as Vriska represents a vivacious spirit that she admires. Vriska tries to emulate Meenah's style, but eventually Meenah grows tired of Vriska, because Vriska is becoming less and less like the one she once was. For now, let's bookmark this timeline and check in on timeline number 3. Part 5.2, Timeline 3, A Date with Destiny. When Ghost Vriska discovered the ancient weapon, it gave John the power to retcon the timeline. This power would soon become essential due to Aranea's actions after receiving the Ring of Life. John, now empowered under the guidance of Terezi, decides to change the past, starting with one event: the day Terezi killed Vriska. Let's rewind. Back on the Meteor, Vriska is about to be killed by Terezi for leaving to fight Bec Noir. John zaps to this moment and punches Vriska the fuck out. This causes Vriska to come to her senses and not die by either Bec Noir or Terezi's hand. The living version of Vriska is vastly different than Ghost Vriska. She does not have a crisis of relevance and instead travels with her friends, helping them patch up various interpersonal problems they have. She reunites with some of the humans on the Meteor, and with certain trolls' mind powers, they use it as a vehicle to traverse Paradox space in search of a new session. John's initial session failed, causing them to have to reset the entire universe in order to begin a brand new session. They begin to travel to this new session, as without their collective effort, this new session is doomed to fail too. The trip on the Meteor takes about 3 years. In that time, Vriska helps Rose overcome alcoholism, she helps Terezi cope with her depression, and she helps lock Gansey up in a fridge. She also creates Tavros Sprite, a recreation of Tavros using his remains in a certain game construct, as well as Arqueus Sprite, which is the amalgam of another dead troll and a certain autoresponder. I wouldn't worry too much about these, other than she appears to have a soft spot in deciding to revive Tavros. She does, however, fuck him over later by adding a cat's essence to the sprite, which he is allergic to, making Tavros allergic to himself. In the new session, Vriska and pals are gearing up for the final fight with Lord English. Vriska, of course, will be the one to finally defeat him. She runs down everyone's responsibilities and sends them off so she can fight the big bad lizard herself. But first, she has some business to take care of. Shortly after the meteor arrives in the new session, Vriska meets herself from the timeline number 2. We left dead Vriska off in a floundering relationship with Meenah, and that's right where alive Vriska finds her. Dead Vriska seems to have quite a bit of character development over the past years of being dead, and alive Vriska has much to say on the matter. Notably that dead Vriska is a fat crybaby loser. Suffice to say, it's awkward. To top it all off, alive Vriska goes ahead and yoinks Meenah as well, as alive Vriska represents the Vriska that dead Vriska left behind. And if that sentence isn't confusing enough to you, that's the 3rd revision I made of it. Alive Vriska and Meenah leave with the house artifact that powered up John from before. Dead Vriska's tale ends shortly thereafter. She gets rejected by Meenah and finds a dead version of Terezi from the game over ending to the old timeline. The two embrace as they watch the world torn apart by Lord English. Their fate is ultimately left unknown. Vriska farts around with Meenah for a little while longer, and they come up on Tavros before the retcons, a Tavros who has miraculously amassed an enormous army of dead trolls to help in the fight. Vriska is impressed with Tavros for amassing the army, with no mind control, and Tavros gives Vriska and Meenah command over it after telling Vriska to, quote, suck it. Meenah climbs onto Tavros' horns. Part 6. The Final Showdown. Tales of Dubious Authenticity. All that's left to do is fight Lord English with her army. She takes the house artifact Juju and waits for Lord English to arrive. Now, officially in the canon of the webcomic, Vriska's life is left somewhat ambiguous. The only canonical hints we get about her fate are some dubious Snapchat messages from Terezi, who, after the gang wins the confrontation, is searching for Vriska's last known position. This last known position, unfortunately, is actually a black hole. A black hole created upon Lord English's destruction of enormous paradox space landmark and power source known as the Green Sun. It doesn't really look good for our girl. The next bit of Vriska lore is pulled from the recently released Homestuck epilogues. These tales are not technically canonical, as they're something of a gray area, but for a complete account's sake, I'm going to delve into them. The dubiously canonical account begins now, so I guess avoid it if you care. Vriska and Meenah encounter Lord English, destroying the Green Sun. She deploys the full power of the house artifact Juju, but before she can see it in action, she falls into the black hole after being hit with some falling debris. Like a bitch. This causes Vriska to fall out of reality and into an offshoot timeline known as the Candy Timeline. In the Candy Timeline, she meets John, who has aged several years and is now a man. He regards her with confusion and tells her about Rose and Kanaya's daughter, who is Vriska's descendant, also named Vriska. Vriska is pissed off that she's been torn away from the fight of her life, claiming that John's new reality, quote, fucking sucks. She's not far from correct. Long story short, in the Candy Timeline, a race war is being waged. Gamzee, the shitty clown troll from before, now reformed, happens upon Vriska. She gets incredibly pissed off at him and they end up fucking in a bush. Yeah, alright. The other Vriska, Rose and Kanaya's daughter, almost walks in on the bush Gamzee and Vriska are doing it in, when the real Vriska is seriously regretting the act of lust she undertook with the shit clown. Gamzee tries to take a post-coital selfie, much to Vriska's chagrin, and upon a heated debate about safe spaces, Vriska chokes the clown to death. Vriska Lalonde peeks in just in time to see Gamzee die. Vriska and Vriska proceed to Cloudwatch, real Vriska using Gamzee's corpse as a pillow. They, due to timeline bullshit, are actually of a very similar age, so they bond over how stupid Kanaya is. Real Vriska muses about John's powers of reality before Vriska Lalonde gets her mood back up with some trademark Vriska wisdom. In her own words, John is a joke. He's a washed-up loser. He's not worth feeling shitty about at all. They bond and discuss their respective issues, and it seems like they're coming quite close chums. Good for them. In the end, Vriska steals John's phone so she can talk to Terezi, who has been looking for Vriska for some time. This is officially the last we see of Vriska. Part 7. Recap. That's Vriska's life, beginning to end, as it stands in the comics. Born a girl on another planet, raised by a shitty mom who was also a spider, burning her bridges with convoluted mind control, participating in a hostile game, navigating death and other timelines, all to culminate in the woman who brought an end to Lord English, only to die before the final showdown. Vriska's life may now be neatly chronicled, but what should we learn from this fictional bitch? To answer that question, stay tuned for part number 2. For now, head to my Twitter maybe.